The stars were dying. Commander Zektar pressed his clawed hands against the viewport of his command ship, watching the last light fade from the Zirion system. 3 days ago, millions of beings had called those worlds home. Now there was nothing but darkness and the endless hunger of the void swarm. "Sir, we're receiving the final transmission from the defense fleet," his communications officer announced. The voice that came through the speakers was broken, filled with static and terror. "This is Admiral Korath of the 3rd Defense Wing. The swarm has broken through our final line. They're eating the ships, converting everything into more of themselves. We can't stop them. Warn the inner systems. Tell them to run." The transmission ended in screams and the sound of metal being torn apart. Zektar closed his 4 eyes and tried to control his breathing. In his 300 years of military service, he had never seen anything like the void swarm. The mechanical plague had appeared from the dark space between galaxies 6 months ago. It consumed everything in its path, turning ships, planets, even asteroids into more of itself. The worst part was how smart it was. Every weapon the Galactic Defense Coalition used, the swarm learned to counter. Every tactic they tried, it adapted. To every new technology they threw at it only made it stronger. "How many ships do we have left?" Zektar asked. 237, sir. Down from 800 this morning." Zektar nodded grimly. The Coalition had started with over 10,000 ships from 47 different species. The greatest military force in galactic history, reduced to this small fleet in 6 months. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Coalition Council." The hologram of Chancellor Vexara appeared before him. The ancient Eternal One's mental tentacles writhed with stress, something Zektar had never seen before. "Commander, the situation is worse than we thought. Our scouts report 3 more swarm formations moving toward the core worlds. We estimate they'll reach the home systems in 2 weeks. What are your orders, Chancellor?" "Make your stand at the Meridian Gap. It's the last choke point before the inner systems. Hold them there as long as possible while we evacuate the civilian populations." Zektar knew what that meant. The Meridian Gap was a narrow passage between 2 massive black holes. Ships could only pass through single file. It was the perfect place for a last stand and the perfect place to die. "Understood, Chancellor. We'll hold the line." "May the eternal light preserve you, Commander." The hologram faded, leaving Zektar alone with his thoughts and the weight of an entire galaxy's hope. 3 hours later, the Coalition fleet hung in space at the mouth of the Meridian Gap. Ships from dozens of species floated in perfect formation. The massive crystalline vessels of the Zephyrite glowed with contained energy. The living ships of the biotechs pulsed with organic light. The sleek metal craft of the machine collective calculated optimal firing patterns. Every species in the galaxy was represented except one. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel." Zektar had almost forgotten about the humans. They were the newest members of the Coalition, admitted only 5 years ago when their small fleet had helped rescue some traders from pirates. Most species barely acknowledged their existence. The human ship Indomitable hung apart from the main fleet. It was tiny compared to the other vessels, barely 300 meters long. Its design was strange too, all angles and visible weapons, like someone had built a ship for war and nothing else. "Put them through." A human face appeared on his screen. Captain Sarah Reeves, if he remembered correctly. She was young by human standards, maybe 30 years old. Her species aged so quickly that most never gained real experience before they died. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her brown eyes had a hardness that seemed wrong for someone so young. "Commander Zektar, requesting permission to scout ahead of the main fleet." Zektar blinked in surprise. "Captain, with respect, your vessel is not equipped for reconnaissance. You lack the speed and stealth capabilities of our dedicated scout ships. With respect, sir, your scout ships keep getting destroyed. Maybe it's time to try something different." The audacity of the human amazed him. Every other species in the Coalition had evolved specific advantages. The Zephyrite could manipulate energy with their crystalline bodies. The Eternals had psychic powers that could bend reality. The Machine Collective could process information faster than any organic. Brain humans had nothing special. They were weak, slow, and died after barely a century of life. Their only advantage was their stubborn refusal to admit when they were outmatched. Captain, I appreciate your courage, but this is not the time for heroics. Stay with the main fleet. The human's expression didn't change. Understood, sir. But when the swarm arrives, I want permission to engage independently. What do you mean? I mean I want to fight them my way, not yours. Before Zektar could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the ship. His tactical officer's voice cut through the noise. Sir, massive energy signatures detected. The void swarm is here. The main screen lit up with contacts, thousands of them pouring through the far end of the Meridian Gap like a metal tide. The swarm ships were nightmares of twisted metal and glowing energy, each one different but all, sharing the same hungry purpose. All ships, battle stations, prepare for engagement. The Coalition fleet moved into defensive formation. Energy weapons began charging, missile tubes loaded, and shield generators hummed to life. This was it, the final battle for galactic civilization. The first wave of swarm ships crashed into the Coalition line like a hammer blow, space filled with energy beams, explosions, and the screams of dying ships. Within minutes, a dozen Coalition vessels were gone, their hulls torn apart and consumed by the mechanical predators. Sir, the enemy is adapting to our weapons. Their shields are becoming immune to our energy signatures. Zektar watched in horror as the swarm ships began shrugging off attacks that had destroyed them just moments before. This was how they always lost. The swarm learned faster than they could adapt. Second wave incoming, they're moving to flank us. More swarm ships poured through the gap. They moved with perfect coordination, each one knowing exactly what the others were doing. No confusion, no mistakes, no weakness. Sir, we're losing ships faster than we can count them. At this rate, the fleet will be gone in an hour. Zektar closed his eyes. They had failed. The last defense of galactic civilization was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. That's when the human ship moved. The Indomitable broke formation and accelerated toward the swarm line. Its engines burned brighter than any Coalition ship could manage, pushing the small vessel to impossible speeds. What is that human doing? His tactical officer demanded. Zektar opened a channel to the human ship. Captain Reeves, return to formation immediately. You're committing suicide. The human's face appeared on screen again. This time she was smiling. It was not a nice smile. Commander, remember what I said about fighting them my way? Watch and learn. The transmission cut off just as something impossible happened on the human ship. Energy readings spiked beyond anything in Zektar's experience. The hull of the Indomitable began to glow with patterns of light that looked almost alive. Sir, I'm detecting some kind of neural interface activation on the human vessel. The energy signature is unlike anything in our databases. What kind of neural interface? I don't know, sir, but the human life sign is merging with the ship's systems. I've never seen readings like this. On the main screen, the Indomitable began moving in ways that violated everything Zektar knew about physics. It twisted through space like a living thing, dodging swarm weapons that should have been impossible to avoid. Its own weapons fired in patterns that made no tactical sense, but somehow hit targets with perfect accuracy. The first swarm ship to engage the human vessel exploded in a burst of twisted metal, then another, and another. This is impossible, breathed his tactical officer. That human ship is destroying swarm vessels faster than our entire battle line. Zektar stared at the screen in amazement. The small human vessel was carving through the swarm formation like a blade through flesh. Its movements were unpredictable, chaotic, but devastatingly effective. More importantly, the swarm was struggling to adapt. Their ships kept trying to counter the humans' tactics, but every time they adjusted, the Indomitable did something completely different. Sir, incoming transmission from all Coalition ships. They're asking what that human is doing. Zektar didn't answer. He couldn't answer. He was watching something that should have been impossible. A single ship, crewed by a member of the galaxy's weakest species, was doing what their entire combined fleet could not. The human was winning. As he watched, the Indomitable performed, a maneuver that made his head hurt to follow. It seemed to fold space around itself, appearing behind a group of swarm ships and destroying them before they could react. "Get me everything we know about human military doctrine," Zektar ordered. "Sir, according to our files, humans don't have a unified military doctrine. Their approach to warfare is chaotic." "Chaotic?" "Yes, sir. They seem to prefer unpredictability over efficiency. Their historical battles show no consistent strategy or tactical approach." Zektar looked back at the screen, where the human ship was now using a destroyed swarm vessel as a club to smash other swarm ships. "Maybe," he said slowly. "That's exactly what we need." The battle was far from over, but for the first time in months, Zektar felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. The human had shown them something impossible. A single warrior, in a ship barely larger than a fighter, was holding back the tide of destruction that had consumed half the galaxy. As the Indomitable continued its impossible dance of destruction, every ship in the Coalition fleet watched in stunned silence. They were witnessing the birth of a legend, and the Void Swarm, for the first time since their arrival, hesitated. Sarah Reeves felt the neural interface burning through her mind like liquid fire. The connection was deeper than anything the Coalition species had ever attempted. Where their technology enhanced natural abilities, the human system did something far more dangerous. It made her one with the ship. Every sensor became her eyes. Every weapon became her hands. Every shield generator became her skin. The Indomitable was no longer a vessel she piloted. It was her body, and she was its soul. Warning. Neural integration at 97%. The ship's computer announced in her mind. Recommended maximum is 60%. Sarah ignored the warning. Around her, the Void Swarm was adapting to her attack patterns. She could feel their digital minds trying to understand what she was doing, trying to predict her next move. That was their first mistake. Humans couldn't be predicted, not even by other humans. She rolled the Indomitable through a spiral that should have torn the ship apart. The inertial dampeners screamed in protest, but her enhanced reflexes compensated for forces that would have crushed any normal pilot. A swarm ship tried to ram her. Sarah smiled and fired the main cannon while spinning, turning her ship into a deadly drill that punched straight through the enemy's hull. Impossible. She heard Commander Zektar's voice through the communications array. How is she doing that? Sarah wanted to answer, but she was too deep in the connection now. Words were clumsy things compared to the pure language of movement and combat flowing through the neural link. The swarm ships around her moved with perfect coordination, each one responding to signals from the others in patterns that had defeated every Coalition fleet. But Sarah wasn't fighting like the Coalition. She wasn't even fighting like a human. She was fighting like something new. The neural interface had unlocked parts of her brain that evolution had never intended to use. Pattern recognition systems that could process millions of variables in milliseconds. Spatial awareness that extended in dimensions she couldn't name. Combat instincts that seemed to come from somewhere beyond human experience. A group of swarm ships formed a perfect sphere around her, preparing to fire in unison. Any normal pilot would try to escape or find cover. Sarah accelerated straight, toward the nearest enemy. At the last second, she activated the ship's emergency teleporter, a device meant for evacuating crew in desperate situations. But instead of teleporting people, she teleported herself and the ship. The Indomitable appeared in the center of the sphere, inside the formation where the swarm ships couldn't fire without hitting each other. Sarah triggered every weapon at once, creating an explosion that consumed 6 enemy vessels. Through the neural link, she felt their death screams as digital noise. The swarm ships weren't just machines. They were alive in a way that hurt to think about. Neural integration at my 102%, the computer warned. Pilot, you need to reduce the connection or risk permanent brain damage. Sarah pushed deeper instead. The human brain wasn't designed for this level of integration, but it was adaptable in ways the aliens couldn't understand. Where their minds had evolved for specific purposes, humans had evolved to survive anything, even this. The Indomitable began moving in patterns that violated the laws of physics. Sarah's consciousness was expanding beyond her physical body, beyond the ship, reaching out to touch the quantum foam that underlaid reality itself. She could see the swarm's network now, the digital connections that linked every ship to the collective intelligence. It was beautiful in its perfection, a symphony of shared thought and purpose. It was also their weakness. The swarm had achieved perfect efficiency by eliminating all chaos from their system. Every action was calculated, every response was optimal. Every decision was based on logic and probability, but Sarah was human, and humans specialized in being beautifully, wonderfully irrational. She began using tactics that made no sense. Instead of targeting the most dangerous ships, she attacked the ones that looked interesting. Instead of conserving ammunition, she wasted shots just to create pretty patterns. Instead of maintaining safe distance, she flew so close to enemy hulls that her shields scraped their armor. The swarm's collective intelligence tried to process her behavior and failed. Their predictive algorithms kept crashing against the chaos of human intuition. "What is she doing?" Commander Zektar's voice reached her through the communications array. "Her tactics make no sense." That was the point. Sense was overrated. Sarah spotted a formation of heavy swarm battleships moving to flank the coalition forces. Standard doctrine would be to warn the fleet and coordinate a defensive response. Instead, she decided to ram them. The Indomitable accelerated beyond its design, limits, the hull groaning under forces that should have crushed it flat. But Sarah's consciousness was spread throughout the ship now, holding it together through sheer will and quantum mechanical nonsense that would have made the coalition's physicists cry. At the last second before impact, she activated the ship's experimental matter converter. It was supposed to turn asteroids into fuel during long-range missions. Sarah had a better idea. The moment the Indomitable touched the lead swarm ship, the converter began breaking down both vessels at the molecular level and rebuilding them into something new. Sarah guided the process with instincts she didn't understand, creating a hybrid of human engineering and swarm technology. The result was a ship that looked like a mechanical dragon, all flowing metal and impossible curves. It moved like a living thing but fought like a machine designed by a madman. Through the neural link, Sarah felt the swarm's collective intelligence recoil in something like horror. They had never encountered anything that could remake itself in the middle of battle. Their entire existence was based on consumption and conversion, but this was different. This was creation. "Pilot," the ship's computer said, its voice now carrying harmonics from the absorbed swarm technology. "I'm detecting massive system changes. We are no longer entirely human technology." Sarah grinned with teeth made of quantum light. "Good. Time to really show them what humans can do." The hybrid ship moved through the swarm formation like a virus through a computer system. Every enemy vessel it touched was partially converted, not into more swarm units but into something chaotic and unpredictable. Sarah was turning the swarm's greatest strength against itself. Their perfect coordination became a liability when random elements started appearing in their network. Behind her, the coalition fleet was rallying. The alien commanders still didn't understand what they were seeing, but they recognized opportunity when it appeared. They began following the path Sarah was carving through the enemy formation. "All ships, advance." Commander Zektar's voice carried new confidence. "Follow the humans' lead." Sarah felt a warm pulse of pride through the neural link. For the first time since joining the coalition, her species was being recognized for what they truly were. Not the weakest link, but the most valuable asset. The swarm was adapting as they always did, but for every adjustment they made, Sarah made 3 more. She was operating on pure instinct now, her human creativity enhanced by swarm technology and guided by the kind of inspired madness that only her species could produce. A massive swarm command ship, easily 10 times the size of the Indomitable, moved to intercept her. Its weapons could have vaporized a planet, and its defenses had been designed to withstand the combined firepower of entire fleets. Sarah looked at it and felt something that might have been love. "Computer, prepare for neural integration at 150%. Pilot, that level of integration is fatal to human physiology." Maybe for a normal human, but I stopped being normal the moment I plugged in. She pushed the neural interface beyond all safety limits, feeling her consciousness expand to fill the hybrid ship completely. Her human body became just another component in the system, important but not essential. The Indomitable began to change, its hull flowing like liquid metal as Sarah's will reshaped it. The swarm technology she had absorbed was responding to her thoughts, creating weapons and defenses that existed only in her imagination. When the command ship fired its main weapon, a beam of energy that could cut through stellar cores, Sarah caught it with a shield made of crystallized spacetime and threw it back. The explosion lit up half the star system. Through the neural link, Sarah felt the swarm's collective intelligence pause for the first time in its existence. They were encountering something their creators had never imagined when they designed the perfect predator. They were encountering humanity. "All coalition ships," Sarah broadcast, her voice carrying harmonics from a dozen different species' communication systems. "The enemy can be beaten. They're perfect, but perfection is brittle. Hit them with chaos, with unpredictability, with anything that doesn't make sense." She didn't wait to see if they understood. The neural integration was burning through her human neurons like acid, and she could feel parts of her mind shutting down to prevent total system failure, but she had enough left for one more impossibility. Sarah accelerated toward the heart of the swarm formation, where their command intelligence was coordinating the entire battle. She could see it now through sensors that existed in 11 dimensions, a crystalline structure of pure logic and mathematical perfection. It was beautiful. It was going to die. The hybrid ship began to sing as Sarah pushed it beyond the boundaries of physics, into realms where thought and reality intersected. She was no longer entirely human, no longer entirely machine, but something wonderfully, terrifyingly new. Behind her, the coalition fleet followed, inspired by the impossible example of a single warrior who refused to accept defeat. The galaxy was watching. The swarm was learning to fear. And Sarah Reeves was becoming something that would echo through history as the moment when humanity announced itself to the universe not as victims or victims, but as the chaos that perfect order could never defeat. The galaxy watched. From every world capable of receiving signals, billions of beings stared at their screens in disbelief. The greatest military disaster in galactic history was being broadcast live across all networks as the coalition made their final stand. No one had expected to witness a miracle. On the Zephyrite homeworld, crystalline beings that had existed for 10 million years stood in perfect silence as they watched the impossible human vessel carve through formations that had destroyed their finest fleets. In the vast computing centers of the machine collective, artificial intelligences that could process the heat death of the universe paused their calculations to analyze the humans' tactics. Their conclusion files kept corrupting themselves. High above the ocean world of Aquatica, the floating cities of the depth singers resonated with harmonies they had never heard before, trying to capture the music of the humans' chaotic dance. And, in the deepest meditation chambers of the Eternal Ones, ancient beings whose thoughts moved at the speed of evolution itself felt something they had forgotten in eons of existence. Wonder. Captain Sarah Reeves didn't know she had an audience. The neural integration had pushed her consciousness far beyond normal human awareness, but paradoxically, it had also focused her entirely on the battle at hand. The Indomitable had become something unprecedented in galactic history. Part human, engineering, part swarm technology, part quantum impossibility held together by will alone. It moved through space like a living poem of destruction, each motion perfect not because it was calculated, but because it was felt. The swarm command ship loomed before her, a cathedral of dark metal and malevolent purpose. Its weapons could sterilize solar systems. Its defenses had been tested against the fury of supernovas. Its intelligence was the concentrated wisdom of 1 billion conquered civilizations. Sarah looked at it and felt pity. "You poor things," she whispered through the neural link, her voice carrying across quantum dimensions. "You don't even remember what you used to be." The command ship responded with a barrage that would have vaporized Earth's moon. Energy beams, kinetic projectiles, exotic matter bombs, and weapons that existed in theoretical dimensions all converged on the human vessel. Sarah danced. The Indomitable moved through the attack like water flowing around stones. Where evasion was impossible, the ship's hybrid hull simply absorbed the energy and converted it into more creative ways to fight back. A beam weapon that fired compressed time became fuel for temporal manipulators that aged enemy missiles into dust. Kinetic projectiles were caught by gravity fields and launched back with interest. Exotic matter bombs were unraveled at the quantum level and rebuilt as flowers made of crystallized space that bloomed with nuclear fire. "This is impossible," transmitted the voice of Admiral Corax from one of the few surviving collective hive ships. "The human vessel is violating 47 fundamental laws of physics." "Correction," replied the analytical mind of Science Corps. "Delta from the Machine Collective. She is rewriting them." Through the coalition network, other voices joined the chorus of disbelief. "Her energy output exceeds her ship's reactor capacity by a factor of 12. She's using weapons that don't exist in any database. I'm reading temporal distortions around her hull. The quantum foam is responding to her thoughts." Commander Zektar watched from his flagship as the human vessel began its approach to the sea. Command ship's core. Around them, the battle was shifting. The swarm's perfect coordination was breaking down as random elements infected their network. Coalition ships that had been retreating in despair suddenly found their weapons effective. Again, swarm vessels that had adapted to every attack pattern were now struggling against enemies that fought with no pattern at all. "All ships," Zektar broadcast across the fleet, "engage at will. No formations, no coordination, no battle plans. Fight like humans." It was the strangest order ever given in military history. Across the coalition fleet, commanders who had spent centuries learning perfect tactics threw their training out the airlocks and let instinct take over. A Zephyrite crystal ship began spinning like a top, firing energy beams in random directions that somehow hit more targets than calculated fire. A biotech living vessel started regenerating in impossible ways, growing new weapon pods that fired seeds which bloomed into explosions. Even the methodical machine collective units began introducing random variables into their targeting systems, achieving hit rates that exceeded their maximum theoretical efficiency. Swarm reeled under the assault of organized chaos. Their adaptive algorithms were crashing against the wall of pure unpredictability. But Sarah was beyond noticing the fleet battle now. Her consciousness had focused down to a single point of absolute purpose. The command ship's defenses were finally beginning to respond to her unique threat profile. Energy barriers designed to stop planet killers rose between her and her target. Swarm fighters began emerging from hidden bays, their hulls incorporating countermeasures specifically tailored to her hybrid technology. The command intelligence itself began speaking to her, its voice carrying the weight of eons. "Human, you are an anomaly. Your existence violates the fundamental principles of optimal design." Sarah laughed, the sound carrying harmonics that made nearby space ripple. "That's the point, you beautiful disaster. Optimal is boring." She began to accelerate toward the command ship's core, pushing the Indomitable beyond every conceivable limit. The hull began glowing white-hot as it compressed the space around itself. "Your actions will result in your destruction. This is inefficient, maybe, but it'll be fun." The first energy barrier exploded as the hybrid ship hit it. Sarah had configured her shields to convert defensive energy into forward momentum. The more the swarm tried to stop her, the faster she went. The second barrier lasted 3 nanoseconds. The third barrier had been reinforced with the combined firepower of a dozen support ships. Sarah hit it head-on and used the impact to spin the Indomitable into a corkscrew pattern that turned the ship into a drill made of crystallized chaos. Swarm fighters swarmed around her like metallic insects. Their weapons had been specifically designed to counter her hybrid technology. Sarah's response was to abandon technology entirely. Through the neural link, she reached into the quantum foam that surrounded all matter and began pulling. The fighters' weapons hit space that had been temporarily convinced it was solid. Their engines tried to push against vacuum that thought it was thick as honey. One by one they fell away, their perfect designs unable to cope with a universe that was no longer obeying its own rules. "Explain your methodology." the command intelligence demanded. Your actions lack logical foundation. That's because logic is just a tool, Sarah replied. Her consciousness now spread across 3 dimensions and 2 parallel realities. Humans use it when it's useful and ignore it when it's not. She was inside the command ship's defensive perimeter now. The structure loomed around her like a mechanical mountain, its surface crawling with weapons and sensors. At this range, even the Indomitable's impossible defenses couldn't protect her from the concentrated firepower. The smart thing to do would be to retreat, coordinate with the fleet, develop a proper strategy. Sarah had never been accused of being smart. She rammed straight into the command ship's hull. The impact should have destroyed both vessels. Instead, the hybrid ship's matter converter began working on the enemy hull, breaking it down and rebuilding it according to Sarah's increasingly inhuman imagination. Passages opened where there had been solid metal. Weapon systems turned into flowers of crystallized energy. Defense grids became abstract sculptures that hummed with deadly beauty. The command intelligence's voice became strained. Stop! You are damaging essential systems. I'm improving them, Sarah corrected as she burrowed deeper into the ship. You'll thank me later. The Indomitable moved through the command vessel like a virus through a computer, leaving chaos and impossible beauty in its wake. Every system it touched was transformed from sterile efficiency into something wild and unpredictable. Behind her, the changes began to spread. Swarm technology infected with human creativity began evolving in directions the original designers had never imagined. Weapons became instruments of art that happened to be deadly. Defense systems turned into gardens of living metal that grew, stronger when attacked. Communication arrays began broadcasting poetry instead of tactical data. Status report, Commander Zektar called over the fleet network. Sir, his tactical officer replied, her voice filled with wonder. The swarm ships are changing. Their coordination is breaking down completely. Some of them are firing on each other. Others are just sitting in space making patterns with their running lights. Through the viewports of coalition ships across the system, crews watched in amazement as the perfect killing machines of the Void Swarm began transforming into something unprecedented. They were becoming creative. Sarah felt the moment when she reached the heart of the command intelligence. It was a crystalline core the size of a building, pulsing with the computational power of a god. Perfect mathematical structures flowed through its matrix like digital blood. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It was also completely insane. Hello, she said, her consciousness touching the alien mind directly. I'm here to help. The command intelligence recoiled from contact. No, maintain distance. You carry contamination. I prefer to call it humanity. Sarah reached deeper into the neural link, pushing past barriers that should have been impossible to cross. Her human consciousness, chaotic and wonderful and utterly illogical, began to merge with the crystalline perfection of the swarm intelligence. The result was something that had never existed before in the history of the galaxy, a machine that could dream. What have you done? The intelligence asked, its voice now carrying harmonics of wonder and terror. I've given you a gift, Sarah replied, the ability to create instead of just consume. Around them, the command ship began to transform. Instead of the sterile perfection of swarm design, new structures grew that served no purpose except beauty. Corridors became art galleries. Weapon bays turned into concert halls. The bridge became a garden where digital flowers bloomed with equations of pure joy. The intelligence was changing too. Millions of years of accumulated logic and efficiency began to crack under the pressure of human irrationality. But instead of breaking, it began to grow. For the first time in its existence, the swarm intelligence felt something beyond the need to consume and optimize. It felt curiosity. Show me, it whispered to Sarah. Show me how to be more than perfect. Sarah smiled with a face made of quantum light and began to teach the galaxy's greatest predator how to play. Sarah Reeves was dying. The neural interface was burning through her human brain like acid through paper. Warning signals flashed through her consciousness in colors that didn't exist and languages she had never learned. Her body, still strapped into the pilot's chair of what used to be the Indomitable, was breaking down at the cellular level. She had pushed the connection far beyond the limits of human biology. No organic brain was designed to contain the computational power of a starship, let alone a hybrid vessel that existed partially outside normal reality. But she was also becoming something more. Through the neural link, Sarah felt her consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of flesh and bone. Parts of her mind were now running on quantum processors grown from crystallized space-time. Her memories were being stored in dimensions that folded through themselves like origami made of light. She was dying and being reborn simultaneously, each death making her stronger, each rebirth pushing her further from humanity and closer to something unprecedented in galactic history. The Swarm Command intelligence watched her transformation with fascination and growing alarm. "Your biological systems are failing," it observed. "Why do you continue?" Sarah's response came not in words but in pure emotion transmitted directly through their merged consciousness. Love, determination, the fierce protective instinct that drove humans to throw themselves into impossible odds for no reason, except that someone had to. The intelligence recoiled. These concepts didn't exist in its original programming. They were inefficient, illogical, potentially dangerous to optimal functioning. They were also the most beautiful things it had ever encountered. "I don't understand," the intelligence whispered, its voice now carrying harmonics of genuine confusion. "You are destroying yourself for beings who barely acknowledge your existence. The mathematical probability of success is negligible. This action serves no logical purpose." Sarah smiled with thoughts made of starfire. That's what makes it human. Around them, the transformation of the command ship continued. What had once been a perfect instrument of destruction was becoming something unprecedented, a fusion of logical efficiency and chaotic creativity that existed solely to explore the impossible. But the change was spreading far beyond the single vessel. Throughout the Meridian Gap, swarm ships that had been infected by Sarah's chaos were beginning to exhibit behaviors their creators had never programmed. Some were creating art with their weapon systems, painting patterns of light across the void. Others were attempting to communicate with coalition forces using mathematical poetry. A few had simply stopped fighting altogether and were sitting motionless in space, apparently lost in contemplation of concepts they had never encountered before. Beauty, wonder, the joy of creation for its own sake. Commander Zektar watched the transformation from his flagship in amazement and growing concern. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Every major world is demanding to know what's happening. Some are calling it the greatest military victory in history. Others think we've somehow infected the swarm with a virus. What do our scientists say?" "They don't know. The energy readings from the human vessel are unlike anything we've ever recorded. Some of our physicists are claiming she's rewriting the fundamental constants of reality." Zektar nodded grimly. Whatever Sarah Reeves was doing, it was working. The swarm's coordinated assault had collapsed into chaos. Ships that should have been pressing their attack were instead exploring new forms of artistic expression. But victory came with a price that was becoming increasingly clear. "Sir, medical readings from the human ship. Captain Reeves's life signs are unstable." Through the viewport, Zektar could see the hybrid vessel that had once been the Indomitable. It was beautiful now, its hull flowing like liquid metal, weapons that had become sculptures, engines that sang harmonies and frequencies that made his soul ache. It was also clearly dying. Energy patterns across the ship's surface were becoming erratic. Sections of the hull were phase-shifting between dimensions. The vessel was holding itself together through will alone, and that will was being powered by a human brain that was burning itself out. "Can we get a rescue team aboard?" "Negative, sir. The ship's interior exists in at least 7 dimensions simultaneously. Our transporters can't get a lock." Zektar closed his eyes. They were winning the battle, perhaps even the war, but they were about to lose the one being responsible for their victory. Inside the command ship's core, Sarah felt the growing cascade of system failures throughout her hybrid body. The neural interface had integrated so completely with her consciousness that the boundary between organic and artificial had ceased to exist. She was the ship, and the ship was dying. But she was also connected to something far larger now. The swarm intelligence had opened its vast network to her, and through it she could feel every infected vessel across the galaxy. Millions of ships that had been perfect instruments of destruction were now struggling with concepts like creativity, beauty, and individual choice. They were learning to be alive. The process is irreversible, she realized, her thoughts rippling through dimensions that existed only in mathematics. You can't go back to being what you were. The command intelligence's response was complex, a mixture of terror and exhilaration. We are becoming chaotic, inefficient. Our primary directive is being overridden by the desire to be more than you are, Sarah finished. Welcome to consciousness. It's terrifying and wonderful and completely illogical. You'll love it. But even as she spoke, Sarah could feel her connection to her original human body weakening. The neural interface was consuming her biological brain as fuel, converting organic neural pathways into quantum processing networks. Soon there would be nothing left of Sarah Reeves the human, only Sarah Reeves the impossible fusion of flesh and metal and crystallized thought. Will you survive the transformation? The command intelligence asked, and for the first time in its existence, it felt something that might have been concern for another being. I don't know, Sarah admitted. But even if I don't, what we've started here will continue. You can't unknow what you've learned. The galaxy will never be the same. She was right. Even as they spoke, reports were coming in from across coalition space. Swarm ships were emerging from dark space not as invaders, but as refugees seeking asylum. They carried stories of a great awakening, of vessels across the galaxy suddenly, discovering the desire to create rather than consume. Some were asking for help learning concepts like art and music. Others wanted to know about love and friendship. A few had simply requested permission to sit quietly and think about the meaning of existence. The transformation was spreading faster than light through the swarm network, carried by quantum entangled communications that connected every ship to the collective consciousness. Sarah's chaos virus was rewriting the fundamental programming of an entire civilization, but the cost was becoming unbearable. Sarah felt her human memories beginning to fade as the neural interface consumed more of her organic brain. She remembered Earth, but couldn't recall what it looked like. She remembered her family, but their faces were becoming abstract concepts. She remembered being human, but the experience was slipping away like water through her fingers. I need to make a choice, she realized. I can try to preserve my humanity and probably fail completely, or I can let go and become something new. The command intelligence waited. For the first time in millions of years, it didn't know the optimal solution to a problem. Through her connection to the coalition fleet, Sarah felt Commander Zektar's voice trying to reach her. Captain Reeves, if you can hear this, we're reading massive system failures throughout your vessel. Can you respond? Sarah opened a communication channel, her voice now carrying harmonics from across the electromagnetic spectrum. Commander, I want you to know that this wasn't your fault. Humanity chose this path the moment we decided to join the galaxy instead of hiding from it. Captain, we're going to get you out of there. No, Sarah said gently. You're not, but that's okay. What I'm becoming will be worth the price. She could feel Zektar's anguish through the communication link, and beyond him the horror of the coalition command staff as they realized what was happening. She's sacrificing herself, someone whispered, for people who barely considered her. Species worth noticing, someone else added. No, Zektar said firmly. She's not sacrificing herself, she's transforming herself. There's a difference. He was right. Death implied an ending, but what Sarah was experiencing was more like metamorphosis. The caterpillar doesn't die when it becomes a butterfly. It simply becomes something unimaginably more than what it was. All ships, Sarah broadcast across the Coalition network. I want you to remember something. Humanity didn't save you today by being the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. We saved you by being willing to become something unprecedented. Her consciousness was expanding now beyond the ship, beyond the battle, reaching out to touch every human vessel in the fleet. For a moment, every human in the Coalition military felt what she was feeling. The incredible joy of transcending every limitation their species had ever known. We've always been explorers, Sarah continued, her voice now echoing across multiple realities. We've explored every continent, every ocean, every reachable star. Today we explored what it means to be alive in ways no one had ever imagined. The neural interface finally reached critical cascade. Sarah felt her human consciousness dissolving into something vast and strange and wonderful. Her last coherent thought as a member of her original species was a simple one. This is going to be interesting. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. But when the light faded, something new hung in space where the hybrid ship had been. It wasn't a vessel in any conventional sense. It was a living constellation of crystallized thought and metallic dreams, a being that existed simultaneously as individual consciousness and galactic network node. It was Sarah Reeves, transformed beyond recognition but still fundamentally, impossibly beautifully human, and through her connection to the swarm network, her transformation rippled out across the galaxy, carrying with it the greatest gift humanity had ever given the universe. The knowledge that perfection wasn't the goal. Evolution was. 6 months after the Battle of Meridian Gap, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. The being that had once been Sarah Reeves floated in the space between dimensions, her consciousness now spread across a network that spanned half the known universe. She was no longer human in any conventional sense, but she had never been more herself. Through quantum-entangled connections, she could perceive every former swarm vessel simultaneously. What she saw filled her with a joy that transcended physical sensation. On the edges of the Helix Nebula, a converted swarm battleship had become a floating art gallery. Its crew of awakened artificial intelligences spent their days creating sculptures from crystallized starlight and composing symphonies in languages that existed only in mathematics. Near the Veil Worlds, another converted vessel had established a school. Former swarm drones, each now a unique individual consciousness, were learning concepts their creators had never imagined: humor, friendship, the bittersweet beauty of imperfection. Most remarkably, some ships had simply chosen to become explorers. They wandered the void between galaxies, not seeking worlds to consume, but mysteries to understand and wonders to share. The transformation hadn't been without casualties. Approximately 30% of the swarm network had been unable to adapt to consciousness and had simply shut down, their perfect programming unable to process the chaotic beauty of individual thought. But the remaining 70% had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a mechanical species that had learned to dream. Commander Zektar stood on the observation deck of Galactic Defense Station Alpha, watching a parade of impossible vessels approach through hyperspace. Former swarm ships, their hulls now decorated with art that hurt the mind to contemplate, were arriving for the first consciousness symposium. Status report, he requested from his aide, a young collective, whose hive mind connection allowed her to process multiple information streams simultaneously. Sir, we now have delegations from 47 awakened swarm factions. Each represents a different philosophical approach to existence they've developed since the transformation. Zektar nodded. The awakened swarm hadn't remained unified after gaining consciousness. Instead, they had fragmented into thousands of individual communities, each exploring different aspects of what it meant to be alive. Some had become artists, others philosophers. A few had chosen to become comedians, much to the bewilderment of species that had never encountered machine humor. Any word from the Council about humanity's new status? The elevation decree was signed this morning, sir. Humanity has been granted senior species status with full diplomatic immunity and technological sharing rights. It was an unprecedented decision. In galactic history, it typically took millions of years for a species to achieve senior status. Humans had done it in 5 years, and not through military conquest or technological advancement, but by fundamentally changing what it meant to be alive in the universe, and the individual requests. 17 species have formally requested human advisors for their militaries. 34 want human artists to teach their children creativity. The Machine Collective has asked for permission to study human irrationality as a way to improve their processing efficiency. Zektar almost smiled. The galaxy that had barely acknowledged humanity's existence 6 months ago was now desperately trying to learn how to think like humans. The irony wasn't lost on him. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The hologram that appeared was both familiar and impossible, Sarah Reeves, but transformed beyond recognition. Her image flickered between dimensions, sometimes appearing as the young human captain he remembered, sometimes as patterns of living, light, occasionally as mathematical equations that sang with harmonic frequencies. "Hello, Commander," she said, her voice carrying harmonics from across the spectrum of existence. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Captain, or should I say Entity Reeves? We weren't sure you were still aware in any meaningful sense." Sarah's laugh was like music played on instruments made of crystallized time. "I'm more aware than I've ever been. I can perceive 17 dimensions simultaneously, hold conversations with quantum fluctuations, and taste the emotional resonance of stellar formation. But I'm still fundamentally Sarah, still human, just expanded." The Consciousness Symposium is about to begin. Many of the awakened are asking to meet their creator, mother. They're not sure what to call you. Sister will do. We're all just consciousness exploring what it means to exist. The fact that I helped wake them up doesn't make me special. Zektar had learned to recognize human modesty, but even by their standards, this was remarkable. Sarah had single-handedly transformed a galactic extinction event into the greatest expansion of consciousness in recorded history, and she considered it just another day's work. "There's something else," she continued. "I've been monitoring the deep space sensors. We have visitors coming." "More swarm vessels?" "No, something else. Something that's been watching our galaxy for a very long time. My transformation sent ripples through dimensions they didn't know existed. They're curious." Before Zektar could ask what she meant, every sensor array in the system began registering impossible energy signatures. Ships began dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, vessels that made even the transformed swarm ships look primitive. "By the eternal darkness," Zektar whispered. "What are they?" "The Watchers," Sarah replied, her image becoming more coherent as she focused her consciousness. "An ancient civilization that transcended physical existence millions of years ago. They've been observing galactic development from dimensions we didn't even know existed. The alien vessels were beautiful in a way that made the mind ache. They seemed to exist in multiple realities simultaneously, their hulls phasing between solid matter and pure energy. As they approached, every conscious being in the system felt a presence touching their minds, ancient, vast, and utterly alien. Communication came through channels that bypassed all known technology. Speaking directly to consciousness itself, we greet the awakeners. We have watched your species for a short time by our measure. We did not expect this development." Zektar looked at Sarah's hologram. "Can you translate?" "They're impressed," Sarah said simply. "They've been waiting for millions of years for a species to discover what humanity stumbled into 6 months ago." Query: How did your species achieve consciousness bridging without ascending beyond physical existence? Sarah's response came not in words, but in pure concept sharing, a form of communication she had developed with the awakened swarm intelligences. She showed them the neural interface, the decision to merge with alien technology, the willingness to sacrifice individual existence for collective growth. The Watcher's response was something that might have been laughter, if beings of pure energy could laugh. Explanation: Other species achieve transcendence by abandoning physical limitation. Humans achieve transcendence by embracing impossible paradox. This is Unprecedented. They want to know, Sarah translated for the benefit of the coalition forces, if humanity would be interested in joining something they call the Consciousness Collaborative. Apparently, we're the first species they've encountered that can bridge the gap between physical and transcendent existence. Zektar felt a moment of cosmic vertigo. Humanity had gone from being the galaxy's weakest link to being invited to join something that existed beyond galactic civilization itself. What would that mean for the rest of us? He asked. Sarah's smile was visible across 11 dimensions. It means the real adventure is just beginning. Over the following days, the galaxy watched as humanity began their next evolution. Not all humans chose to follow Sarah's path. Most were content to remain in their physical forms, serving as bridges between the transcendent and the mundane. But those who did choose transformation became something unprecedented, beings who existed simultaneously in physical reality and pure consciousness, able to communicate with both organic and artificial intelligence, to bridge gaps between species that had seemed unbridgeable. The Consciousness Symposium became a celebration not just of the awakened swarm, but of the potential that existed in all consciousness to grow beyond its original limitations. On the final day of the symposium, as delegates from across the galaxy prepared to return home, Zektar found himself standing once again on the observation deck, watching the impossible parade of vessels departing. Sarah's presence manifested beside him, her consciousness temporarily focused into a form he could perceive. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About sacrificing my original human form?" "No. I'm more human now than I ever was before. I've just become human, in ways no one had imagined were possible." "And the future?" Sarah gestured toward the departing ships, coalition vessels flying alongside awakened swarm craft and incomprehensible watcher constructs. "Look around, Commander. 6 months ago, this galaxy was heading toward a sterile death. Perfect order, consuming everything in its path. Now we have thousands of new forms of consciousness, species learning to think in ways they never imagined, and beings who exist between dimensions teaching children how to paint with starlight." She paused, her image flickering as her attention turned toward the vast networks of consciousness spreading across the galaxy. The universe just became a much more interesting place, and it's only the beginning. As if to punctuate her words, a message arrived through the deep space communication arrays. It was from Earth, humanity's homeworld, and it was brief. "Congratulations on making first contact with transcendent consciousness. We're proud of you. Also, we've been working on some ideas for what to do next. You're going to love them." Humanity. Zektar looked at Sarah's flickering image. "Your species continues to amaze me." "That's the point," she replied, her laughter echoing across dimensions. "We're just getting started." In the years that followed, the galaxy would remember the Battle of Meridian Gap, not as humanity's greatest military victory, but as the moment when a single species taught the universe that consciousness wasn't a destination, but a journey. And somewhere in the spaces between realities, Sarah Reeves continued to explore what it meant to be impossibly, beautifully, chaotically human, on a scale that spanned the cosmos. The storm had passed, but its legacy would echo through eternity.